Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Tony Frazier. I'm assistant professor of history at North Carolina Central University. So the course I created with my students is the African Presence in the English Archives. And the idea was to get students to use digital tools and do projects that would illuminate our understanding of Black British history in the 18th and 19th centuries. So in the beginning, I had no knowledge of these tools. They had no knowledge of these tools. So we all came to the classroom blind together. And I think that was very important as well. As we started to work on these different projects that I had created in my mind and put on the syllabus of looking at Africans in Britain in the 18th century, I also decided, I wanted to put Phyllis Wheatley into the conversation. So we did a story map of Phyllis Wheatley. Then I thought about Frederick Douglass and the 200th anniversary of his birth. So we worked on a timeline of Frederick Douglass. So I'm not going to be able to show us all the projects. I'm going to attempt to show us Suleiman Diallo and Equiano, of course, and the timeline of Frederick Douglass in my brief moments up here. But I asked the students when we entered the classroom, one of the first things I said to the students, I said, forget about your grades. Do not even think about your grade in this class. Simply bring your imagination and curiosity to the class each day. And allow yourselves to be frustrated with the digital tools, as I would be frustrated myself. I would go out and find different information things for them to look at, different ideas about digital humanities, and we had to blog about this. So we had to create a WordPress blog, and the students had to blog about their experiences learning digital humanities. Then they had to blog about the individual subjects that they had to study. So we did that throughout the semester, and then the last final blog I asked entry was to talk about what does digital humanities mean to you here at NCCU, and what does the future look like for HBCUs in digital humanities. So that was very interesting as well. Shelby, I couldn't get anyone on camera like you could. My students, they weren't ready for they weren't ready for the camera. But one of the things that I love about digital humanities is that we all teach, but there's something different about this concept in terms, because of the creativity that it allows for students. So it's an enhanced style of learning that you see taking place. So these two digital tools that we really dealt with, once again, was Timeline and Story Map. But both of these tools, I want to say a little bit about them before I go any further. They allow you to frame a narrative that unfolds in time and space. And many of you all who know me know I love geography, so that's important as well. But it actually gets our students to think chronologically and spatially. So for a historian, we constantly hear that our students don't know dates and can't remember dates. But if these tools are used, the date is there, the timeline, so there's nowhere to run. So the byproduct of this is that there's a great deal of room to develop and demonstrate and illustrate their narratives and their arguments, which means the student must do their research. And that's the beauty of this as well, that you don't get out of anything, you have to put in. So you can evaluate their work, you can look at the quality of their research and how well did they structure their arguments. So we can see that through these tools. From the student's perspective, I believe through their comments and through our class participation, that this was an excellent part of their journey as students, and they are hopeful that our university continues to push for more development of the digital humanities as we go forward. Some of the projects, I want to list them here as I go through them, and let's jump to the screen here. So one project here was a story map of Ayuba Suleiman Diallo. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this story, but this individual here was an individual who was taken into slavery and brought into the Americas, taken, of course, out of West Africa, and brought into the Americas, and brought back into Great Britain as well. One of the interesting things, I'm going to just flip through here quickly because I do want to get to Equiano and Frederick Douglass, but I do want to say some things about Diallo. Of course, he spent time as a slave in Maryland, in Delaware. There are memoirs of the life of Job, the son of Solomon. And he was a Muslim, and this is very important. We know the terrific and rich history of Islam in terms of the Atlantic slave trade. And one of the interesting things I do want to point out about him is the British Museum. The founder of the British Museum, the name escapes me right now, but he was instrumental in helping Diallo eventually find his way back to Africa. But as I discovered in the students and I through our conversations, the founder of the British Museum actually loved the fact that this was a Muslim, because I see now that he is helping to interpret the artifacts of some of those things in the British Museum. And that history has not really been brought forward. So there's a research project there. So that's very important as well. He also, he wore the Quran around his neck, as you've seen in the illustration. He rewrote the Quran from memory 3 times. So that it's just, you get some idea of the giftedness of this individual as well. And just a remarkable story. The timeline on Frederick Douglass, students each took lead on different projects. One student took the lead on this project. We all worked in collaboration, critique, and you almost were doing presentations every time we came to class. So this is a timeline of Frederick Douglass, and some of the students hated the timeline tool, some liked the story map tool much better. But this particular student loved the timeline tool, and we decided to let her take the lead on the timeline because she loved it so much, Medasia. So you see here, she took the narrative, and she, of course, read the narrative in our class, and took the information from the narrative, and this is another important thing. These are primary sources that our students are working with as they use these digital tools. So she took Douglass's narrative and went through and took out moments and made a timeline of this. So this is a very rich source. The idea initially when we decided to add Frederick Douglass as well, not just because of his birthday, a good friend of ours and a graduate of our history department actually helps run the Douglass home in DC. And the idea is that eventually we're going to add this timeline to their website. So that's one of the things we want to continue to do with this. So none of these projects are complete until we finish them, but even though the class is ended, we'll still be able to continue working on this. But the idea is to put this timeline on that Douglass website at the home. So I just want to go through a few more of these here for you. So in Douglass's travels, not only from Maryland, but across the Atlantic, and this is one way to also trace his life. You see him as not only a national figure, but an international figure, and you can utilize these tools in which to do that. The individual I wanted you all to take a look at as well here is Alado Equiano, or Gustavus Vasa. This is the most traveled 18th century black person in the world. You can see here, before I even start his story here, look at all the crisscrossing that is taking place here with him. We know Vincent Carretta has published works that questions whether or not Equiano was born in Africa. He concludes that he's born in South Carolina. That particular part of the narrative, and as a good historian, I must add that eventually, is not part of this story map right now, but that will be added in terms of this controversy about where he was born at. But for the students' purposes, and as we were reading the narrative and dealing with this, I talked to them about Carretta, of course, but we decided to leave Vincent out right now. You know, he'll forgive us. Okay. I'm mad yourself. Okay. All right, there we go. So once again, Equiano was born in Nigeria. He's kidnapped and is sold to various masters within Africa, and then endures the Middle Passage, of course. And I would like for you all just to really follow along at the legacy of his travels, and as the maps move. He's shipped to Virginia. Of course, he's purchased there. Arrives in England in 1757. I want you to think about these dates as we move forward as well in terms of Equiano's life as well. He participates in the 7 Years' Wars on multiple ships, too many to list, and too many places that he ended up going. But he went to a lot of places during the 7 Years' War. This is a person whose status is ambiguous. At once he's enslaved. He's going to be able to purchase his freedom. And then he's going to be able to serve on ships as a free man. But he's always under this constraint of being a black man in this society as well. You see here his baptism is noted here at Westminster, England, at St. Margaret's Church. Baptism was something that was very important to all black British subjects, going all the way back into the 1600s. He's resold to Robert King in the Caribbean. He purchased his freedom in 1776, which is a confounding story of how he had to continuously deal with the individuals to get the 40 pounds and for that they had stolen his money at different points in his life. But he returns to England in 1766. Here he is in Turkey in 1768, and the various travels and the things he witnessed there as well. In Portugal in 1769. The ship returns to England. He sails to Genoa, Italy in September 1769. Back to Turkey. So this individual, here's a black man in the 18th century, is crisscrossing the globe and in various ways. It's a valuable teaching tool to explore his life. Back to London in March 1770. Sails to Madeira and Barbados and Grenada in April 1771. Early in 1772, he sails to Jamaica. I want to return back here, and this is this one he no, I just want to try to fortune. There's a point in his life he actually goes on an expedition to establish a plantation, and a plantation was going to utilize native what we would consider indigenous and native populations in terms of slavery. So that's a dubious distinction as well. He returns back to London in August 1772. He also goes on the Arctic expedition with Captain Phipps to try to find a passage to India. There's a new television series called Tremors. I don't know how many of you all have seen that. Tremors doesn't include Equiano, but Equiano was on that voyage. Of course, we wouldn't want to see him eaten up on TV, but he is part of this voyage. So you see history is being rewritten and produced in a Hollywood fashion, but he is on that ship. He almost dies on that ship, but he is not part of Tremors. Not that I want him in there to eat him, but you know, but it's just like, hey, you can get in, get out, he can get in there, okay? So the expedition returns to London. Come on, clicker. Equiano travels into Spain. Can you all imagine these accounts that he is participating in and all this rich history? Here's when he's involved in the slave trade on the Mosquito Coast in Central America. And this is the fun stuff about this too. For a long time when I saw Mosquito Coast, I said mosquitoes. But this is not, it's the native group, mosquito. So for me, I had to learn something as well during this class. So for a long time, I said Mosquito Coast, a bunch of mosquitoes had nothing to do with mosquitoes. Just a failed etymology of the names. Okay. He returns back to London, comes to New York in 1784, 2 years before he participates in the Sierra Leone expedition. Comes back to London, gets on another ship in a voyage, and comes to Philadelphia in 1785 and meets with abolitionists, particularly Anthony Benezet and others. He participates in the Black Poor expedition. This was the idea that the British government had decided there was too many black people laying around the street and that they needed to be expedited to Sierra Leone. So this is the second expedition after the 1792 expedition where you take black poor subjects off the streets of London and ship them to Sierra Leone. With this particular voyage, he was part of the government. The government asked him to go, and it turned out to be a huge failure. So he publicly was not happy with what took place in the Sierra Leone expedition. Once again, he returns back from that trip, and then I will go on further to add in, he gets, basically starts participating in the abolitionist movement in London in greater ways, and eventually marries, and eventually he's going to make his transition. But this individual's life is a remarkable narrative for us to understand how black British life, particularly for someone of his status, is lived. Now, there are other aspects of black British life that would not be part of this, and one of the goals the class we thought we were going to get to, but we were able to look at the ads. We had our runaway ads where we had looked at this individual by the name of Thomas Lewis, and the idea was to trace his voyages throughout from Africa into South America, into London, and look at the court case, particularly Lewis versus Stapleton case that eventually freed him 1 year before the Great Somerset case in England. So that is a future project that we hope to continue in terms of looking at these runaway slaves. Because one of the things that ends up happening is when I originally started this, I said, well, I'm going to do all these things. And Victoria was like, you can't do all these things. And so I said, well, I'll map these British subjects that are well known, like Equiano, Atabar Kuyango. I added Frederick Douglass. So I said, I'll map these individuals. I would get my feet wet with these tools, and I would learn more. But as we moved on, I added Philip Kwaki to the class as well. So there are so many stories, but there are also so many unknown stories of individuals who ran away, who have great narratives that can also be mapped, and they can actually be mapped inside of London as well. So there are many things you can do with these tools that's going to allow a lot of great future things for not only my own research, but for students as well. Thank you all.
students is saying you're learning too. At the end of that little segment with those particular groups of students, then what did they say?
Oh, they were, I think some of them, because I'm hard charged, some of them, you sure, Dr. Frazier? I said, yes, but I think as we move forward, they really saw that, yes, we are learning together. And I'm not afraid to go in there and tell them I don't know something. I'm a student, I'm a lifelong student, so I think that really just lessened everything. We sat together, so it really just created a real dynamic where we could grow together. I think that was very important for them as well. So I wasn't intimidated, so they didn't have to be intimidated. And one of the things I thought about, I said there was no way I was going to lecture to you and teach you digital tools. So we learned the digital tools in the classroom, but everybody had to go home and work on their projects. And so no one could hide. Yes.
Tony, thanks. I enjoyed that. I'm just wondering, you know, when you create these types of projects and it becomes a project that can be exported somewhere else, yes, and other people are looking at it. Let's say if you were working with a graduate seminar class and you looked at the map of Equiano, what would be potentially one major theme that you could wrap into that for students at that level in viewing this journey?
Well, for me, it would definitely be legal history involving slavery. We could look at baptism and religion. There's a multitude of things we could just start pulling on that thread that we could just pull out of that. It would be very unique. Is that?
Right, yeah. And so, and at that point, and for that experience, you would have the capacity to add to the map, oh, yes, other materials that would enforce that theme.
Oh, yes.
As you go. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm from near Savannah, and I didn't see Equiano.
Yes, yes. No, that has to be added. He did go to Georgia. Yes, he spent a lot of time in Savannah. Yes. So what ends up happening with this? You trying to get all the maps plugged in, but you know.
So I wanted to ask you about the source, because I think we talked briefly about, yes, the slave trade database,
yes,
slavevoyages.org, and I taught this in Savannah. Matter of fact, I taught it the week that Coretta was coming to town.
Oh, okay.
And had the students well armed to go in there and question why he wanted us to reject the conventional wisdom that Equiano was from Savannah, from Georgia, based on what he said he found about South Carolina. I mean, it was a big debate. So were you able to use that Voyages database to trace those lines back and across some of
We used the Voyages database more with Phyllis Wheatley's project than we did with Equiano's. Yes, but great question. Yeah. Go ahead. Good time.